Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to the European SDG Summit session on corporate human rights indicators. My name is Nadine Höninghaus. I'm the Executive Director of Econsense, and we're one of the two national partners of CISA Europe in Germany. We're the largest German business network on sustainability, and in this respect, we have 39 member companies that are active on a variety of fields regarding sustainability. Today's session we dedicate to the topic of human rights indicators, how to measure, how to monitor, and how to follow up on human rights commitments and performance. I would like to introduce the agenda of the following session to you. What we plan with you for the moment, we're right in the middle of the first point of the agenda, the introduction. We'll have a short introduction on the paper because this session originates from a paper that has been developed in our team. And the author, Laura Franken, who is my dear colleague and also my co-host in the session, will introduce her findings in person right after I finished. We will have the great opportunity to discuss social indicators, human rights indicators with MEP Sirpa Pietkainen, who will join us in a bit. And also afterwards, the chance to discuss the different aspects of measuring social and human rights performance with great minds from different perspectives of the whole financial market system. You will have the chance to also get into the discussion with your questions via the chat function. So please already now take notes or post your questions during the session in the chat, and we will get back to your questions later on in the session. With that, I am just happy to give a tiny kickoff for what we are planning with you and why we decided to take up that issue now within this SDG Summit. Next slide, please. For those of you who are following sustainability and the recent 2-year sustainability policy initiatives, not only on the EU level, but also on the level of many member states closely, it is pretty obvious that requirements for companies in terms of human rights due diligence are on the rise. There's regulation coming up. Many member states already do have a national regulation in terms, and the request and expectations from stakeholders, from policymakers on the one hand, but also particularly from investors on measuring a company's human rights performance field of due diligence questions are rising too. We have experienced that within the discussions in our networks, when we talk about measuring performance, not valuing sustainability performance, but measuring human rights performance, indicators are not that mature and widespread yet quantifiable indicators as they are in other fields, let's say in the fields of environmental indicators. For that reason, we did kind of explore research and would like to introduce these first findings of our research, and with that kick off the discussion on how and whether to measure human rights indicators. I'm handing over to Laura, who's the author of our paper. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. I would like to raise a few points on a recent Econsense discussion paper that we have just published a few weeks ago. When we go on to the next slide, I would just like to give a brief overview. So this discussion paper provides roughly 100 quantitative human rights indicators. And the core question that we ask ourselves in this paper is, first of all, what are the human rights topics that companies need to address, and what is sort of the full list of human rights topics that are part of the core human rights documents. And then also, as the second pillar, so to speak, we researched what kind of quantitative indicators by established institutions are already out there that can be used by companies to really integrate human rights issues into their core management systems and also apply it in a financial sector context. The result of this is a discussion paper that is available now in 2 languages, in German and English, and it comes along with an Excel spreadsheet that you can find also on our website together with the paper, which just basically provides the entire list of human rights topics and all the indicators that we have researched. And I will give a bit more of an overview in a second. Before I go into some of the aspects that are in this paper, I would also like to stress that the core processes and the entire concept that is outlined in the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights are the standard set of what companies need to do to fulfill their human rights due diligence. But quantitative indicators can be an additional example to just sort of use it as one angle and one instrument for a company to really proceed and put targets on it. Before I proceed, I think there's a sound coming from one of the noises here, and maybe it's even my microphone. So I'll just I think I'll just keep it for this for the session for now. Okay. When we turn to the next slide, I would like to show just a few thoughts that we try to address in this paper. The first one is, and now I can, the first one is that we were trying to ask ourselves, what are the core human rights issues? And everyone that is in the field of business and human rights, but also in sustainable finance, that is connected to social and human rights issues usually has a view on social and employee matters as one particular topic. So on the left-hand side here, we showcase, or we put down the definition of social and employee matters as it is provided by the European Commission in its communication on guidelines and non-financial reporting. And when we look at this list, we can really see that many social issues are, in fact, human rights issues. Before I proceed, I'd just like to, can everyone hear me all right? Okay. I'm not sure whether this is, but yeah, okay. Hopefully you can.
Still, I'm sorry, Laura, there still is some clicking background sound, and I can't really locate where this is coming from. Yeah. So whether the combination speaker phone maybe.
I have muted my phone for now, so Barbara can't hear us anymore. So to sort of, make that easier.
Like that, it's better.
Okay. All right. I'll just try to continue like this. So what we try to point out here is that many social issues are in fact human rights issues. And just to give you 2 examples, when we look at the second bullet points here, for instance, diversity issues, meaning gender diversity and an equal treatment in employment and occupation, this is something that is very clearly linked to a specific human right, which is the freedom from discrimination. The same holds true for health and safety at work, which we can see further down in the list. So this is very much linked to the right to safe and healthy working conditions, and it's also part of the ILO core labor conventions. So sometimes the distinction between social matters and human rights matters are not very clear, and in fact they're very much connected, and that's why we looked at the whole spectrum of these issues in our paper. This paper is publicly available. That was a question in the chat a few minutes ago and can all be downloaded on our website. When we move to the next slide, I would like to show you a few examples of the indicators that we collected for this paper. Here, for instance, if you look at the 3rd row, the right to an adequate standard of living is a human right that can be influenced by companies. For instance, if you're providing access to housing, to workers for instance, on a construction site, but also in seasonal labor. And when we look at the right-hand side here, potential indicators that could be used are the average cost of rent, electricity, and water compared to the local standard, the size of the room or the apartment per person, or for instance, the number of days to end a housing contract upon the termination of a work contract, meaning the risk that a person will become homeless once the work contract is terminated. Another example on the very bottom here, the right to organize and collective bargaining could, for instance, be, at least to some extent, accessed through an indicator such as the share of company employees that are covered by formalized employee representation structures and or collective agreements on working conditions. Therefore, we would just like to, this is just more like a snippet of the entire list that you can find in the Excel spreadsheet, but just to give you an indication of what kind of indicators we were looking for in this quantitative list of human rights indicators. On the next slide, and that's the last sort of topic that I would like to present here, we would like to give you an overview of the setup of the indicator spreadsheet so that you can better navigate the Excel spreadsheet that we provide. On the left-hand side, in the first column of the spreadsheet, we have provided this list of human rights issues based on the core human rights documents, which are the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, as well as the ILO Core Labor Standards. And also we looked at the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, as this is a topic that can sometimes or is often addressed in the field of business and human rights. When we then do the next click, we see the highlight on the next column that is provided in this Excel spreadsheet. That means we provide here an indication whether business activities have a high potential impact on the respective human rights issue or not. That means that some human rights issues are very clearly linked to business activities. Others can be influenced to some extent in a certain situation, and yet others are very much in the state realm and therefore can probably only be very much or have a low influence by companies, or low potential one at least. Now on the next click, so to speak, we highlight the column on the quantitative indicators. So this is the full list of indicators that we researched and that we then matched to the specific human rights issues. That is to say that a human rights issue can, of course, only be addressed to some extent through a quantitative indicator, but at least this can help companies to better implement it in management systems. On the next click, we highlighted that there are 2 plus signs that you can click on where you can find the human rights documents and the human rights indicator sources so that you have access to all the original sources that we used for this research. Next click is then the focus of the indicator. So in this column, you will find an indication whether this indicator has a scope that is more targeting one's own company or the own operations of a company, or rather the suppliers. And then lastly, for the last click here, we can find in the right column of this Excel spreadsheet an indication how to access or assess these respective indicators, meaning, for instance, which departments of a company need to collaborate to find the relevant data to assess this indicator. This is just to give you an overview of what this indicator spreadsheet looks like. And for now, I would turn over to Nadine to the discussion on what the relevance of this topic is on an EU level, and to introduce our next speaker.
Thank you very much, Laura. Can you hear me well? Maybe just give me a short sign of hands if that's possible. Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much to the team. Just to calm you, if you were overwhelmed by all the tiny information on the slides, do not worry. We do have a great Excel spreadsheet with the paper coming, so you can zoom in as closely as you want to. The link has been posted in the chat. Thank you very much for that. And there are also printed versions, so if you drop us a note, we can send you a printed version afterwards. But this is enough for kind of marketing of Econsense products. I am very happy that We have one speaker on the line, and we're honored that she has the time to join us here, because I can't imagine anyone who's better, who would be better to explain the relevance, why we're dealing with that now, why we're dealing with measuring human rights performance of companies and how that fits into a regulative idea that has been started in Europe a couple of years ago and belongs to one of the most ambitious agendas I currently see on the EU level. I'm happy to welcome Sirpa Pietikainen. She's a member of the European Parliament and has been since 2008, being a member of the EPP in the European Parliament. She was Finland's Minister for Environment from 91 to 95, and also many years a member of the Finnish Parliament before that and during. She is now in the European Parliament a member of 3 committees very relevant to the whole sustainability agenda. Committee of Economic and Monetary Affairs, Women's Rights and Gender Equality Committee, and the Environment and Public Health Committee, a committee that couldn't be more important than it is now these days. We have got to know Sirpa Pietikainen as a knowledgeable and most experienced speaker in terms of circular economy on topics of eco-design, waste reduction policies, and circular economy practices. But since the whole sustainability and sustainable finance action plan has started, MEP Pietikainen has become the lead negotiator on behalf of the European Parliament for the EPP group on the whole complex package of sustainable finance. And dear Sirpa Pietikainen, we're very welcome to have you. We're very happy to have you here on board. A warm welcome from this feeling so distant virtual panel. And with that, I hand over the virtual microphone to you. Thanks for being here with us. Now, of course, I hope you're here.
Yeah, she should be with us. I received a message. And Julian, you have to switch presentations, please.
So on the bottom, you have a microphone symbol and the camera symbol if you want to unmute yourself.
You're still muted.
Can't see all the speakers, I have to admit.
So now I...
There she is.
Now I
there you go.
managed to unmute myself. Well, this is very effective in the in these days, this muting system, when it really sort of puts the voice out of you. And I'm very happy to discuss you about this social dimension of sustainability and sustainable finance. And I'm not sure if you have the right slides there with you, because at least those ones that I had were about this environmental side when it was, when it was supposed to be the social side. But anyway, you are happy to share them with the audience later on if you wish. But then on this fact, actually, we do not have the social part. But I can explain it to you, because I did prepare for the right subject and discussion. As you know, we have had the long process of having this sustainability reporting system in European Parliament. And it has started with the environmental factor for 4 reasons. Firstly, it has been seen as more acute, as a matter like the climate. And then there's more ready-made indicators, reporting systems and life cycle analysis already existing. And as you might know, in the run on the pipeline of the taxonomy is that it is entered into force. It is pushed for both private and public funding. And then the second part on it is that we are getting by the beginning of the next year the first delegated acts, and this is how the taxonomy in climate is to be interpreted and then calculated. Then we are going to have as a next year already also the DNS, do no significant harm. And this, of course, goes very much on the environment. In the environmental factor, there are 9 sectors what we are measuring. But it is not only the environmental part that do no significant harm principle. It is also the social side. So that means that if you claim that your activity is environmentally sustainable, it can't cause any substantial, significant harm for social sector either. What that then means, it is very much, as you know, in discussion about the corporate human rights and what is used in global reporting initiative. It is the ILO principle, it is the workers' rights, it is the right for organizing in trade unions, right to fair salary, whatever that means, right for healthcare, right for various issues, and good working conditions. And it is the right of indigenous peoples too. So you can't, for example, build a dam on the indigenous people's lands and say because this is water, renewable energy based on water, then actually it is sustainable, because then you would destroy the rights of the indigenous peoples. Or that matter, you can't use forced labor when you produce, nor child labor when producing solar panels, and to get this credit that this is environmentally sustainable, this is a green sustainable investment. And so at least that is the minimum what is all around in the discussion for the pretty long time, that you would need to respect ILO conventions and principles, and you would need to have certain decency in the activities, and you can't significantly harm the rights of indigenous peoples, women, children, or forced labor issues like that. We do not yet have this out, but they probably will come out on the next year. But I wouldn't be expecting to have any radical proposals from this side, because this is the minimum requirement, as you can envisage, because we are talking about significant harm. Then the big political fight actually has been about the social indicators and social reporting. For some politicians, it has been in Parliament and in member states extremely difficult for 4 reasons. One reason is that now when we are sort of putting out the environmental indicators, both on the disclosure, on reporting, and on taxonomy, if we would full-fledged put the social indicators, it would be too much work and too much administrative burden for the companies. Then again, those ones that I tend to be on that side, that say that you would need them anyway, say that, okay, you can't have the sustainability because it's a balanced act if you do not have the corporate responsibility in the governance and also in the social sector. And that anyway the investors are questioning these, and anyway the SDGs entail the social sustainability part. So anyway the companies need to start reporting and investors paying attention on that side. So it might be easier to get this kind of a time plan where you get out all the E, S, and G factors. Then about the social indicators, there is a proposal that was the compromise in Parliament and between Parliament and Council, that the Commission would consider launching the social indicators within the upcoming 3 years. And on my understanding, after we've got the non-financial reporting directive out that mainly has the environmental side as taxonomy, but it would include, but it's of course open still yet what it is going to be. It would be then the point where in the legislation it would have the principle for the social taxonomy, and then the Commission would come out with the social taxonomy proposal after these, let's say, around 3 years. And there's a lot of discussion and pressure about the social indicators around the Commission and around the investor community. Then the 3 or 2 questions that are sort of most upfront, actually the governance, I'll touch that because it sort of relates to sustainability, and social also, I touched that very briefly, is then that, okay, what do we mean actually with the social rights and social indicators? Do we see them in the context with the environmental indicators, and that is sort of the harmonized way that you would need to have both environmentally sustainable and socially sustainable? Or then, and we have advocates for that too, that you could only pick the social indicators and to get the label that you are socially sustainable company, but you wouldn't necessarily be environmentally sustainable company. I understand very much the reasoning for these speakers, because they think that if you have, for example, social companies that hire people, disabled people or people with long unemployment history or otherwise difficulties to get job, if you your activity is providing substantial share of the profits of the local community, or if you are putting substantial amounts of your resources on education, healthcare, building the healthcare and other activities, especially in developing countries. And if you are a health company, or if you are a company of social services, let's say for elderly people, you necessarily wouldn't have the environmental aspect, or you couldn't sort of show that you are environmentally sustainable, because that is out of the relevance of the business. And so that sort of resonates the logic, but personally I do not like the idea. And this is a bit like the whole SDG point, that we think that there are different elements that are irreplaceable parts of the sustainability, and you just can't pick and choose and say, look, this is climate sustainability, never mind about biodiversity, case palm oil, and about orangutans. Or look, this is social sustainable, no that matter that you produce the solar panels with child labor. But you can't either create that kind of a sort of a mismatch of labels and sustainability concept, because then you might have, let's say, a coal company saying, look, we are socially sustainable, we are preserving the workplaces, and we have a quite substantial outreach for social services, education, healthcare, so on, so for our workers. And no, we are not thriving for environmental sustainability. And that's why, at least beyond the do no significant harm principle, you should have at certain level, and I usually have this sort of a spectrum, 50 shades of green and gray, you should have some elements beyond not only doing harm that are good for the environment. And if we think that kind of a social company that is justifying at the moment, and I can relate to that worry, that okay, we do not have significant environmental impact. You could say we do not have, because we are servicing elderly people, or we are educational institution, you can say it, but still you can sort of show that, okay, we buy renewable energy, our chemicals are non-hazardous and toxic, what we are using in cleaning. We have launched energy saving program, or we are educating all of our workers how to save resources in the process, or we have, if that happens to use cars, we have more energy efficient or better cars for our workers, or whatever that is. So I don't see it is impossible to achieve the environmental levels, as it is not impossible for environmental sustainability to achieve at least some level of social sustainability. Okay, then the big question that I would actually leave more for you, because I do not have the ready-made answer, then is that, okay, if we have pretty clear understanding and global agreement, even though we have not harmonized the indicators and life cycle assessment in the environmental side, we know that, okay, you need to measure resources, energy consumption, the emissions and the chemical toxicity and the waste. You need to measure biodiversity impact and indirect land use and CO2 and water separately. So we do not actually have an agreement. What would be then this kind of okay, these are the 6 or 8 things to measure from the social side. It is, of course, in general level, you can say it that it is the workers' rights, it is the right for healthcare, good, decent salary, and good social security in the form of pensions and healthcare and this and that. But then again, and I heard the earlier comments, it is the question what kind of a metering system you create there, and what is the life cycle analysis that actually you do have the methodology in environmental side, because you need to catch the whole chain of providers. So what is then the methodology in the social side? And there's a strong voices, and I tend to like them, that, okay, you would need to actually pick up the Global Reporting Initiative as a basis, because it's the broadest, it is the oldest and the most sound, and to start building and detailing on that basis. But there are some other resonating voices also that you should develop that with UNDP and its human development indicators and SDG indicators set totally differently. Then another point to conclude is the governance, because that, on my opinion, it's of course being a good proper corporate citizens in the society, but it relates for the social sector too. It means that you would need to have targets and reports about how you implement diversity in your culture, so that people from different backgrounds, gender, sexual orientation, being handicapped, different religious or indigenous or color or ethnicity or whatever background, so that you would have the rainbow effect, and that you would have the facilitating mechanism, so that you actually enable the minorities to not only to be recruited, but to adhere better positions in your organization and in your company. It is the non-discriminatory policies. It is the policies of safe and sound working environments. It is about creating whistleblower structures, so that in case that there are problems in the working culture, there's some place where you can inform safely the problems. Then it is, of course, in big way about how you act abroad. It is the due diligence requirement. You need to be aware of your impact on your activities in other countries also. Just like you are aware about your financial flows, and you can't justify in big multinational company that, well, we do not know what happens in our Chinese units or Vietnamese or Nigerian or whatever that is. You just, even though you are European, you need to know. So it is the requirement to know, requirement to have a good governance and supervision structures in place. And then the big thing is about the taxation. It is the taxation transparency and footprint. And that, of course, requires a bit different legislation. It is discussed whether that is put into action, probably not. We have the transparency directive for that, for example, is the and non-financial reporting directive. The point then is how you put your tax activity upfront in your company reports. And even though you use tax benefits, you wouldn't use aggressive tax planning or fraud, and you wouldn't benefit special treatments by some governments for your company. So that is the special, as you know, the special bargain. What is the level of the taxation you can get there? Okay, I'm just looking the time.
Yes.
And leaving it up to you for questions and comments. And if you are in time pressure, I'm very happy to get your questions later on and commenting them also later on.
Thank you so much, Sirpa Pietikainen. That was really very comprehensive also, the different angles from which you look at the social dimension of all the taxonomy issues ahead. I liked your example, and we haven't heard so much of the trading issues between being either environmental or social, and that this is in discussion. It hasn't reached us, or at least me in Germany yet, which is very interesting. I'm sure this can also be taken up by the panel that will follow, and I hand over to my colleague Laura to introduce the next speakers.
Yes, thank you. This brings us to our actual roundtable, where we have experts that are very much working on ESG, but also finance and human rights issues. And I'm very happy that we have 3 people here connected in this digital roundtable. I will introduce the 3 speakers now up front, and then we will dive into each of their statements. And I'm very much looking forward to this. So the first person that I would like to introduce is Dr. Dennis Hensel. He is the Global Head of Institutional Investment Advisory and ESG Advisory at DWS, one of the world's leading asset managers. He's responsible for ESG investment advice to institutional, but also to large retail clients. He's a member of the ESG Methodology Board, and together with the investment platform, he is responsible for ESG investment offering and also for product design. His team advises institutional investors such as pension funds on the topics of investment strategy, risk management, and long-term investment solutions. And as such, Dr. Hensel is very much suited to give us the perspective of the financial sector on this topic. So a very warm welcome to you on this panel.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you to give me the chance to joining this interesting virtual conference. And I really like the dialogue to that point. So we like to show you a little bit the way how we look at the social dimension of ESG. And one thing that I can really confirm out of the last presentation or experience is that you must look at every dimension. You cannot look isolated only at the ES factor. So it's always a combination, and all our advice to clients as well as for products is you must be good in every pillar. So when we go to the social dimension of ESG, this is by far more difficult to get qualified data and information as when you look to the E, because in the E sector you can very easily calculate the carbon emission. You can very easily see the impact of a business strategy on these greenhouse gases. But for the social part, there is not a clear definition. And as we heard, there is even not a clear taxonomy till now. So we must go a little bit to another view. We must look where are principles that we believe are very important. And a good starting point is always the United Nations Global Compact principles, so that you can look there to these categories. And very important, you must understand the business of a company, and not only to look at the corporate, you must also look at the suppliers. We heard this, the supply chain for global companies is very difficult to analyze. You must look at the products, and you must also see what is the relation with the customers. And one question by preparing this virtual conference was really what kind of data we have. And as I said, we are using the 4 categories of the United Global Compact, and we also want to have information about the principles corporates are looking at the labor organization. And so to combine this, there was a decision by DWS in 2014. We cannot generate these data on our own. We will buy them. So in 2014, we started to screen the market and to look what kind of rating agencies are able to give us the full picture on every ESG facet, and particularly also on the social part. And currently, our model consists of 5 different rating agencies, very popular one like MSCI or ISS ESG or Sustainalytics. And now we have the first really challenge. When you look at the data, the methodology is not completely the same at these rating agencies. So you have a dispersion between these different ratings. So you must combine them, you must map them, and you must map them to the pillars that are interested for you. So an investor, and of course a retail investor, cannot look at 28 different principles or guidance. So you must combine them. And at DWS, we have 6 different pillars. This is human rights, employment rights, governance, customers and products, environment, and best business ethics. So for these 6 pillars, we check if a company has risks due to their norm violations. And first of all, as I said, the rating methodologies are different. So even how they map their results to the 6 pillars of us, so we must compare them. And very important, as an investor, this is an investment signal. So you must check if there is a materiality of this factor in the future. So what is the impact if a company has problems with their labor rights? And so this is something where we challenge also the rating agency to be there very precise. And of course, also our investors, they want to have a reporting. They must use this reporting even for disclosure functions on their side. And last but not least, we are using this information for our own engagement process, because I strongly believe very important is to not only exclude companies with these risks, we must go into a discussion with them, and we must show them what we expect in their business strategy to be more in line with our social setup, so that we can invest to them even in the future. So after saying this, so we map all the information to our pillars. Second, we weight the different norm factors. So because for us, human rights, labor rights, as well as environmental decisions are more important as the others. So because the financial impact is bigger, and we observed that in the past. And secondly, or thirdly, it is important to see how severe is a violation. And we already learned this. It is mostly calculated as revenue shares that are generated with a norm controversy. And one point here is also, is there any structural problems? There can be a company, they have labor problems at every single factory globally. So in all these small problems sum up to a very severe problem in the labor rights pillar. And so for us at the end, this is something where we see huge risks. And at the last step, we aggregate all the information of the rating agencies and we combine them in our own rating. And to make that very short, it is starting with an A rating, companies where we observe no exposure to any kind of norm controversies. And we have two ratings at the bottom, an E and an F, where we observe really severe controversies or really significant risk exposure. And this is at the end till now purely a transparency approach, really to handle all the information. But for investors, it is also important, how we use this information. Do we skip all these F-rated companies, or do we go start an engagement process, or what can we do? And when you look at an MSCI World, MSCI Equity Investment, this is the broadest and well-known standard index for our investors. Roughly 4.5% are in the F bucket. So there are huge companies, very well-known companies, which are currently ranked with huge risk out of social factors. And we have 8% inside the E bucket. As we learned, there is no taxonomy, so there is no guidance what you should do with them. And I can only give you what DWS is doing. I'll tell you, we are excluding all the F-rated companies, and we are starting with all the E companies an engagement process when it comes to our dedicated ESG funds. And so this is exactly also my message. I strongly believe that over the long term, these aspects are very important and that social investments are leading to a higher risk-adjusted return, but we must be more precise how to use them. Of course, we need the transparency also from the corporates, how they integrated this in their business strategies. And we as asset managers, we must be able to show our investors the materiality of these factors and what is the impact investments, even on the risk, on the return side. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. I think there's a lot of points that we will pick up then in the discussion. But for now, we turn to our second speaker here in the roundtable, which is Barbara Lamprecht from Volkswagen. She's joining us via phone, but we can see her on a picture here on the slide, so that at least we have her here. Barbara Lamprecht is the coordinator for business and human rights at Volkswagen Group. One of her main tasks is the implementation of the topic of business and human rights into the group's compliance management system. She's supporting the rollout of the system into nearly 800 controlled entities of Volkswagen worldwide. And she and her team are consulting the Volkswagen colleagues for all business and human rights related topics in the compliance management system and also on ad hoc cases in their own entities worldwide. So Barbara can give us a lot of insight into the practical application of how to integrate human rights issues into compliance management systems. And with that, I would hand over to her. A very welcome to you, Barbara Lamprecht from Volkswagen.
Thanks, Laura, for presenting me, and thanks for giving us the opportunity to bring a company's perspective on this incredible important topic. topics. So when we started to integrate this in the company's compliance management system, we did this for sure based on the UN Guiding Principles. And one of the first steps was to define the salient issues. What are the most relevant human rights aspects in context of our business? And as you can imagine, these are topics around employees' rights, but also around tolerance and diversity. And when we started to think about how to make this topic measurable, for sure one of the first things to discover is something like this impact model from PNEO, which maybe some of you may know. And you have to learn that there are different levels of, so to say, activities you can report. And we have to learn about output, outcome, and impact levels. And very quickly we realized, for sure, since we are in the beginning of the discussion regarding KPIs, we are mainly looking into the output level. And if you start to look into this, you are realizing and checking what might be sources where you can get this data from. And very quickly, you are realizing that you have to go to your human resources colleagues because they have facts and figures about topics like discrimination, sexual harassment, violations maybe of occupational health or safety requirements. But also there are numbers available in the area of compliance trainings, for example, code of conduct, anti-corruption trainings, but also you can cross-check facts and figures about human rights violations, which might be reported through the whistleblower system. And also here, quite a number of statistics is available. So if you ask me about what could be or what are the key challenges when you talk about quantitative human rights indicators in the practice, for sure one of the first points is you have to have a common understanding in the company about human rights and about the salient issues in your company. And together with the colleagues from neighbor departments, you have to identify significant and meaningful indicators because you would like also to fulfill the topic of transparency. And on the other hand, the indicators also have to have a quite long validity. Because you have to make your reporting comparable. So KPIs must be applicable for maybe something like a 5-year period. And last but not least, you have to fulfill the external expectations. And if you hear the speaker speaking before me, these are exactly the areas where these KPIs are becoming more and more important. So, for example, I'm joining now, in the meantime, mainly once per month, investors meeting, where my finance colleagues are inviting us and to introduce our compliance management system. And for sure, questions about KPIs or measuring and targets are always a question. So altogether, I would say it's a process, and we are now discussing this topic through the company. Also, the Econsense document is quite helpful for us in this context because we do not have to invent the wheel new. And what I also would like to mention in this context is we are also now seeing what kind of discussion is going on the regulation area. We have in Germany the discussion going on about human rights due diligence law maybe coming up. We saw the recommendations from the European Parliament regarding this topic, and we can see that in every discussion, in every element, there is a chapter about reporting and KPIs. So therefore, it's absolutely necessary to take this topic on your priority list up to the top and come up and prepare also the company for the reporting necessities which may come up in the future. Maybe so far for this point.
Thank you, Barbara. That was very insightful for practical application. And before we start the discussion, we will now hear the input from Charles Miller, who will provide us with the civil society perspective. He is the co-founder of Finance and Human Rights, an NGO that is dedicated to this topic, but he also has over 30 years of experience as a lawyer in the finance industry. He was formerly a partner at KPMG and also a Deputy Director General of the Luxembourg Fund Industry Association. Now he's an independent director and an avocat honoraire with the Luxembourg Bar. Already during his time at KPMG and at the Luxembourg Fund Industry Association, he was already in charge of sustainable finance topics. So he has a lot of experience that he can bring to the table. Today, he is a member of the Luxembourg government working group on business and human rights. And as said, he co-chairs the NGO Finance and Human Rights. So therefore, we are very happy to have you here with us. And we're very much looking forward to your view on the topic on human rights indicators. Charles, I turn over to you. We can't hear you, I think. Nadine? Oh, I think you're muted.
Still not.
I'm afraid, let's switch here. Yes, maybe if you're using your mic there. Nope. Could you just click on your camera, your symbol there again? Yeah. Nope. No, still nothing. Maybe if you would join the platform again, maybe that would help. And we would ask one question to one of the speakers in between. Nadine, what do you think?
I think that would be a good idea, Charles. I'm really sorry. We're taking in one question as an icebreaker in between, and then everybody is ready once you rejoined, okay? There was one question from Manuela, and it is pretty, it goes more to the, it is good at the moment because it directs more towards companies' perspective and also maybe the investors' perspectives, how you handled it or what view you have on it. Manuela was asking, first, how companies already quantitatively, I hate that word in English, measure their due diligence, and if this is happening, whether there is a way to also include setbacks a company might experience through the COVID-19 pandemic and effects that might have on the measuring results, how you could include that, whether this is possible to include somehow in the assessment. But before we answer the question, we do the sound check with Charles.
Yes,
Charles,
can you hear me now?
Brilliant. So we save the questions, keep the question in mind. I will repeat it later, but now we turn over directly to you, so we have the full circle of stakeholders completed.
Yes, thank you very much. And sorry, it's like this, you rehearse it 3 times, it always works, and then when you are live, suddenly it doesn't work anymore. But my apologies for disrupting.
No worries, you're here, that counts.
No, I was going to say something about the speed of change. I've been working in this industry now for over 30 years. As you said, I have been involved with the topic of sustainability in finance for quite some time. But if somebody had told me 5 years ago that in 2020 there would be a major conference with commissioners from the European Commission, with members of parliament, with high-ranking people from business, talking about sustainability, talking about human rights, talking about factors of how to measure human rights in business, I would have told this guy, you've eaten too many funny mushrooms for breakfast. I wouldn't have believed him. The speed with which we are talking about all these topics, I think, is absolutely amazing. Now, we should learn from the drivers to see what we can do more in the future. For me, the drivers for this change are the society at large, and society are people, and people are customers. And if we hear the representative of DWS saying, well, I have institutional investors that are now asking these kind of questions. So it is important to me. That is, I think, an important element. If we hear Volkswagen say, well, we have customers and it's important to them, what drives change is the wish of the customers, but also politicians, because customers are not only customers, they're also voters, and suddenly you have the political debate. What strikes me, I mean, I heard Sirpa Pietikainen, that would have been a green speech 7-8 years ago. Today, it's the speech from somebody who is a member, and a very distinguished member, of the European People's Party. People's Party is the party of Angela Merkel, of Ursula von der Leyen. So the topic has gone mainstream also in the political arena. The only ones where I'm a bit worried about when we talk about raising the topic is the financial community itself. When I talk to my former colleagues, they still have a certain tendency to look at me with big eyes when I start talking about human rights in finance, and they say, well, he's turned funny after retiring from my previous job. So there is a resistance to change. I think the EP has talked about resistance to change as well when it comes to the taxonomy on social issues. We need to be aware of that, but we shouldn't. That shouldn't prevent us from moving forward with the same speed as we have for the moment. The speed, I think, is striking. You had a slide before in the Econsense presentation. On the left-hand side, you had business and human rights topics. Actually, that legislation has been there for quite some time, but it has not been very successful. And you have sustainable finance on the right-hand side, much newer, but picking up much more quickly. Why? I think the old business and human rights regulation is principle-based, and the new sustainable finance regulation is detailed legislation with, and that's important, it's a bit sorry to say, but it's important, it has sanctions, and it has a policeman, or we call it then the regulator, the BaFin in Germany or the CSSF in Luxembourg. The national regulators have very clearly been given a task to supervise what is happening. And I think it's this pressure of having detailed legislation with potential police people and sanctions that is driving the change forward. There is no doubt that the change comes from the climate side, and the human rights topic is piggybacking a little bit on the climate discussion. That's why the taxonomy, for example, the EU Commission has started with the taxonomy for climate. That's not a problem, but already 3 years ago, when that discussion started, the question was, when will social come? And we were told, oh, a little bit later. Now we are 3 years later. We are still told, oh, a little bit later, and perhaps in 3 years. So that's a bit disappointing that in the sustainability discussion, social aspects are always looked at a bit later. Nevertheless, even in the climate taxonomy, the whole discussion about do not significantly harm, I think, is very important. The minimum safeguards telling us that you can be as good as you want on the environmental side. If you do not respect human rights, you will not get a label as being sustainable. I think that is a very important message. The real next step, I think, for us to know where we are going with this are the sustainability disclosure and the regulation that is coming up. The regulation has been voted, and very importantly, to the point of what are we going to measure. The ESAs have been asked to provide us to provide us with implementing standards, and in this implementing standard, it was the first time that I've seen actually quantitative elements popping up, where you have a number of questions on human rights, and it says, now tell us, and that's for the finance industry, financial market participant, for example, DVS for its funds will have to tell its clients how many of the companies they invest in have a human rights due diligence, have a policy on child labor and things like that. So there is a measurement element that is coming into regulation, and if we ask ourselves the question, what should we comply with in the future, obviously an important answer will be in the regulation. Now, normally, the financial markets don't like regulation. That's why I was very surprised to see that in the study that we conducted as Finance and Human Rights with the University of Geneva, we polled the financial services industry, and 80% of the respondents said we actually would like a regulation. So the finance industry itself says we would very.
No, there's no sound.
Charles, we just lost you.
Yes, no, am I back
now? You're back.
It says here, you have been muted by the technical admin. So I have unmuted myself again. Full of
it's not me.
I'm fighting the technical admin here. Perhaps a sign that I should close my argument.
No. She apologizes. That was a mistake.
Absolutely fine. Don't worry about it. I was saying that we will have a law defining the criteria, and that actually the finance industry, 80% of the respondents to our study said we want a law because they want to know what they have to deal with, what is expected of them, and also what is not expected of them. So, can you hear me? Because
now you're back. Now you're back.
Okay, good. I'll be quick. So the criteria of what we will have to deal with will be in future legislation. Perhaps the last word on the Econsense paper. I think the Econsense paper is an excellent paper. It's a source of inspiration. It's a bit of a Rolls-Royce. I mean, I'm not surprised that there was a working group with very large members doing the Econsense paper, because if you comply with that, we are absolutely perfect. I'm a bit concerned that perhaps small and medium-sized enterprises will not be able to afford the Rolls-Royce. They should not be scared by seeing this. I think they should continue in their own efforts, and there are certain elements in the Econsense paper that even if you are not perfect, if you don't comply with all the criteria that you have there, you can already do. So let's embark, and that's my message to the industry. Let's embark on that journey. The law will help you. The standards from the industry itself would help you. With one just last word, and then I will have finished. We are talking about quantitative elements. They will never replace, and the Econsense, its paper itself says this, they will never replace a human rights due diligence. They can complement a human rights due diligence, but they will not replace it. So I believe certainly what will be expected also in the new regulation that is being proposed by the EU is a sustainable corporate governance with a due diligence on human rights. Now I've muted myself because I finished.
Charles, thank you very much. Laura, I was actually waiting for you to come back.
Yes, now I'm back. I was just with the background noises. I think that's because of the phone. Thank you so much, all three of you, for your inputs. I think these were really great insights from three very distinct and different angles, but all of them very much of a deep dive into the topic, I feel like. We now have roughly 20 minutes left for the participants' questions. So we would invite you to post your questions in the chat, and then we can redirect them to the three speakers. We already did receive some questions, and Barbara Lamprecht is also still on the line here. I believe Petikainen is also still in here. Okay, perfect. So then we have all the speakers now that you can direct your questions to, and please feel free to use the chat. Nadine, do you want to go ahead with the...
Yes, thank you.
Perfect.
Sirpa, it is great to still have you on the line. There was one question directed to you on the corporate human rights due diligence coming by legislation. The initiatives also just Charles mentioned on the sustainable corporate governance combined. And what is the Parliament's view on that? Whether the impact this will have on supply chains will already do the job, or do you expect because there are already some member states that have run forward with the legislation on that. Are the member states leading the field for that, and the union is following? What is your perspective on that?
Well, that is the usual case. Some of the member states are leading, and those leaders are needed. Like EU, then in this sustainability reporting is needed to lead globally. And what I expect to come from there, and how tight that is actually very interesting, because we do have different avenues. If personally you would ask me, I wouldn't have a different sustainability regulation for companies. I would put it directly on company law and the respective directives, like accounting directive on the reporting requirements. Knowing that this probably is not politically viable, then we go this sort of a separate route. There are parliament's interest groups that I'm involved also, that demands this company sustainability separate legislation, and it just might work very beautifully if we sort of go in line that, okay, this is the framework that actually the company law would be, on my opinion, which says that you need to report by SDGs, you need to report by the taxonomy, says taxonomy needs to develop the social standards and reporting requirements later on, it says. So it needs to be linked to taxonomy regulation, because then if you have a bit different separate company sustainability liability regulation, what is the risk is that happens what happened with non-financial reporting directive. The requirements are so weak and the reporting levels are raised so high that it comes to many parts not effective. And well, this is some this kind of a political inside discussion what we have. Then when it goes to supply chains, I understand that I relate very much to the company worries about how difficult it is to get the information. But there the EU regulation, be it separate directive or part of the company law or accounting directive that you need to put these reports, what happens is that then when it is required for European and European-based companies to do it, the market itself, that is more than 20% of the global market, is so big that no one is practically going to leave it aside. And yes, there are risks, and yes, there are cases like the hand-dyeing bonds what we have in Bangladesh that probably couldn't be able and not willing to create that kind of a reporting systems. But any larger scale of businesses, and in textiles we know the horror, that would be set the requirement on that level that it would force the whole supply chain to react. And in those cases they can't and they won't. Then it would put the companies to consider, because there's the due diligence requirement as there is and should be for investors in financial side, to choose and use that kind of supply chains that can fulfill the criteria. Then what is important, and this is another question, but I just wanted to raise it, is that we put that in our other legislation and we develop the market surveillance regulation, because it can't be so that in European companies there are some requirements and some actions, and then if you just import, knowing how big part, just to pick up the textiles, are ready-made exported €1 t-shirts in European markets, that they wouldn't comply for these requirements. So there needs to be in market surveillance regulation clearer requirement to comply with all EU regulation. And then one thing that I have proposed, and that is the point, there would need to be the third-party auditing systems with high sanctions, and the rapporteurs would need to be European-based, because we do not have that much of resources and in our customs to check the processes. Sorry for the long answer.
No, that was very insightful. Thank you, Sirpa, because it is really helpful also to get insights into the discussions that are going on, because what we see from the stakeholder side is the public consultation is coming up, but we do not see how the different policy options are weighed in your discussion. So that is very, very helpful. Thank you very much. Laura, do you want to pop in the next question from our audience?
Yes, we had one question very early on from Manuela, who is joining us from New York. She's connecting this issue also to the COVID-19 crisis, and she asked that whether there's someone who could elaborate how to integrate COVID-related developments into the human rights due diligence and into company reporting, keeping in mind that companies, how still are figuring out how to quantitatively measure and present company-specific impact on human rights, but that the COVID-19 crisis is sort of displaying a lot of layoffs in supply chains and access to healthcare, etc. So many human rights issues. And I think Barbara Lamprecht would be a perfect person to answer this question, because she's very much in the practical application of due diligence requirements in a company. So Barbara, I hope you can hear us all right, and we'll be happy to hear your insights from this.
Yeah, thank you, Laura. I'm happy I can hear you all right. That's always not easy, sometimes with the technique. Yeah, the COVID-19 is a very special topic, and as we all know, absolutely new for everybody. So what have we done so far? We elaborated for our own company, so to say, the healthcare team developed a kind of guideline or a measure set, more or less put together in a flyer, in a little mini handbook, with all the measures we as the employees of the company can take to stay safe and healthy. And we realized that there was a need for such a information booklet, and we received requests. And so what have we done? We shared this document with our suppliers to support them to keep their employees' health and safety. And because not every supplier is that huge and have single people who are able and have time to elaborate such a document. I could not say too much about how could you measure this and how could you put this into a kind of KPI system. Lucky-wise, we can say that these days we still have kind of stable supply chain and have not experienced a massively COVID-19 impact. But as I said, we try everything to support our suppliers with giving them guidance and support. And we have in our purchasing department a sustainability team which is taking care of the ESG related topics. And therefore we did it with concrete help, so to say.
Thank you, Barbara. I hope that was clearly understandable also for all our listeners. Worked for me at least.
Thank you so much. So we still have 5 or 6 minutes for a Q&A. And Laura, did you have a question on mind also that you would like to channel into the discussion? Why our next questions are typed in the chat?
Yes. So please feel free to also raise your questions in the chat and we can then still address them. But one thing I was wondering about, we often talk about very severe adverse human rights impacts when we talk about business and human rights, or also finance and human rights, I guess, in a new spin. But is there a way how we could better define positive impacts of companies on human rights issues? Because companies clearly contribute a lot also in terms of training, in terms of other measures that they put in place. And maybe is there someone who would like to take this question right away? Otherwise, I would ask Charles or Dennis to take up that question, because we haven't had a chance to hear follow-up questions from them.
Who would like to go in first?
So maybe
Dennis,
I start shortly, and one sentence to the last question. So from the outside, when we look at the development of the social scores of all the companies, we must highlight that during the pandemic, during the crisis, the social score decreased in its values. So this was a pretty difficult thing, mostly driven by labor rights issues. So you can imagine in the US, there were problems that workers still were forced to work even as the pandemic or the crisis was bigger. Second question, and even there can only highlight things. I still miss this, exactly what you mentioned. So we know that we have the and the SDG scores, and we always look for solutions providers to do good impact. I miss this on the social side. So we are talking mostly about the problems. And as I said, we have these rating, we have the rating classes, and also the rating agencies provide this. But the demand of our investors to overweight in their allocations, really the companies that have good social criteria in place, like all the factors we spoke, this is something we still miss, and we have no financial products. So question, what starts or what should start? I hope both the request for these kind of products as well as our industry to provide them to investors, but very good question, and I hope this will come up in the future.
Thank you, Dennis. Charles, do you want to come in on that one too?
Yes, perhaps just one point on one of the previous questions. Different laws in different countries. I mean, the topic of laws is now more or less on the agenda of every country. We talked about Germany considering a law, Switzerland considering a law, the Dutch have something, the French have a law. If you are a multinational company like Volkswagen or Deutsche Bank, the worst that can happen to you is if you would have to comply with roughly the same law, but because it's a national law, one is a little bit more green and the other one is a little more red or more blue, that would be a nightmare. So that is, for me, the best advocate to have one European set of rules, because otherwise we will harm the topic more than anything else. So I think it's a very strong driver. High standards, I think, every time that the EU sets higher standards, there are those people saying, oh, we are killing the market. You will see this is going to be a catastrophe. People will move out of Europe. And in most instances, the contrary has happened, is countries outside of the European Union who have said, well, if they have those standards, it's perhaps a good idea. Let's copy those standards. So we have been a standard setter, again, with my experience from the financial industry, more than anything else. Now, the question of the impact. What is interesting in the sustainability disclosures is that in the first phase, you have to disclose the way that sustainability risks are being incorporated. So you have risks and you incorporate them in what you demonstrate, how you incorporate them in what you do. In the second phase, you will have to demonstrate the impact that you are also making on human rights. So it goes to human rights in general, sustainability, but includes human rights. So you have the two elements. So the question, yes, is how do you measure that? There are specific impact funds that have given themselves clear rule on how they address the issue, but certainly that's a niche for the moment. And the question is, how could you measure it for the more general business and financial institution and financial products?
Thank you very much, Charles. So as much as I would love to do a last round of insights, unfortunately, we are running out of time, and it is not very easy to sum it up, but all of you really did enter some quite good points on the discussion, and I love the way, Charles, how you described it, that a couple of years ago, we wouldn't have dreamed of having a discussion like that. I remember in early 2018, I was in Brussels at the big conference at the Commission where President Macron was sharing his vision on sustainable finance, and even though the room was packed with the whole financial community, loads of auditors and high-level staff of the Commission, we were a bit like insecure, like the sustainability people in the room, being like the very tiny minority there, wondering, so what are these people now doing with sustainability? Still, it is a very green agenda, and like Sirpa has put it, and Charles, you too, the social keeps getting postponed in a way. It might, and in that terms, we do see that the social and the environmental, they can only go together, and the governance at the same time. If we think of Wirecard issues we just had here in Germany, you can't think it apart. However, we feel a skepticism that COVID-19 might increase that delay a bit because there's severe essential discussions going on. But what I feel now, and what I also get from the audience, thank you very much for your questions in that discussion, that the stakeholder, not only interest, but real stake in the issue, investors' stake in keeping asking questions and asking about risk management, asking about benefits, will still increase, is strong, becomes stronger, and will carry us beyond that bump we might experience through the COVID-19 pandemic. I thank, first of all, the organizers of CSER Europe for giving us the opportunity to raise that subject here. Thanks to all of you honorable speakers for your time and your flexibility, even with technical difficulties, having people on board via phones and speakers and everything, dialing back in and out. You are a very agile team. I thank my colleague Laura and Julian, who did that as a team from Econsense. We wish you a great day, stay safe, and see you soon. Goodbye.
Thank you.